Statement, and then if you'll raise your hand, we'll get you a microphone for some questions.
Good afternoon at this point. My apologies being deliberate there. One of the lessons is I have to provide some opening remarks. So I give the big ones in the big room and follow up here. So first of all, this is different, is it not? We're accustomed to just walking across the hallway, and now we're in Atlanta and probably figuring out your camera angles to grab the coaches as they walk down the hallway is a challenge we've introduced into your lives. I thought it was important as we talked about the potential to be in Atlanta really last year, but with the College Football Hall of Fame, the presence we have in Atlanta with our conference championship game, to take advantage of the opportunity and do something a little bit different. First time since 1985 SEC Media Days has not been in Birmingham, and I think we're off to a positive start, particularly with a fan event yesterday in Centennial Park. This morning in my remarks, I felt it was important to honor my predecessor, Mike Slive. We've done that in different ways, but this is the first real public opportunity for me to both remember and honor Mike for his great work here and to thank his family for allowing us to spend so much of our time with him and so much of his time with us. We talked about realities around our football scheduling, why we approach things, using the manner in which we do for scheduling. We talked about changes around us, particularly media relationships, much of which is positive, but the change is real. ESPN's new president, Jimmy Pitaro, and his participation in our spring meetings to visit with our leadership was enormously important to us, as is the success of the SEC network, our overall relationship with ESPN, and then what we do with CBS. Also acknowledge the change that resulted from the Supreme Court decision in Murphy versus the NCAA, what that means for sports gambling, and our attentiveness to issues and our learning as we go. Beyond that, we have had remarkable accomplishments, 5 national championships, 2 more in sports that we don't sponsor championships, 11 runner-up finishes to national titles, 15 National Athletes of the Year or co-National Athletes of the Year, and that's in 21 sports. So to have 2/3 of all the National Athletes of the Year from the SEC is a remarkable tribute to their achievements. And then honored our softball teams and South Carolina quarterback Jake Bentley for their sportsmanship at the conclusion, because we can easily forget how important our student athletes are to us, but they are the reason we exist. So with that, I'll try to be helpful with the topics that might be on your mind today.
Okay, we'll go back here, back right in the cameras.
You talked about the change from Birmingham to Atlanta in your opening statements. What are some of the things that you like about it being here, and if any, what are some of the things that you don't like that you'd maybe like to see changed?
I had a few of your colleagues comment on their appreciation for not needing to connect on their flights into Birmingham, so that's one positive. The College Football Hall of Fame venue is at the top of that list. I stood at practice last night for my remarks, looking at a football field underlying the tables, goalpost at the end, and knowing that there are 107 coaches or student athletes honored in that building. That's an important part. The ability yesterday to create what we called Summerfest, first-time experiment. I think we had just over 5,000 people flow through during the day. SEC Nation was there. The ESPN Monday Night Crew, which has 2 university alums, and Booger McFarland and Jason Witten, and then SEC Nation alum Joe Tessitore was special, along with our normal SEC Nation cast. And there's just some different activations that can happen here. Now, you have to move a little bit differently than you did at the Winfrey. And this is a predicate, if you will, to the fact we'll be back in December in Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the second time. So it seems to all fit together. If we were ever going to move out of Birmingham, this was, to me, the most logical site beyond our typical home.
We'll stay over here in the back right.
Greg, how would you like alcohol sales to the open public to proceed, and do you see that as an untapped revenue potential?
The revenue piece is actually not at all a priority in the conversation, and I want to be intentional about that. If it were simply about the revenue or reduced to that, we would have done this 5 years ago. The reality is that we watch what's happening across the country, yet we have a policy that's decades old. And there is not a majority of our membership right now that's ready to just say, let's take that policy away. Their direction to me is let's manage our current policy in an appropriate way, but also let's engage in some learning and understand what's happened. And I think that's important. So there's been a proliferation of clubs in private areas over the last 5 years where more alcohol is available in venue, just not in the general seating bowl is the expectation. One of the realities is the bulk of our students attending games are under the legal drinking age. Not all, but most of our undergraduate students fall into that demographic. There's an importance around the atmosphere, and others have introduced alcohol sales and reported they've maintained and maybe enhanced their atmosphere, but we have a large number of families attending our games. We also are attentive to the student-athlete treatment and respect around our games. There are varying state and local laws that govern alcohol, liability issues to which people are attentive. And then I think it's important that we understand what research exists. So rather than anecdotal comments about we introduced alcohol and here's what happened, let's make sure we really understand what happens, what are the real best practices for alcohol oversight within stadiums, what happens pregame, postgame, and in-game now from a security standpoint. We know some of those things, I think, from research. We've received reports. The binge drinking before is often cited as part of the problem. We don't allow pass-outs, and what I mean by pass-outs is leaving at halftime. So any binge drinking that may be brought into the stadium and somebody, 10 minutes in, either pass out, fall out, act out in an inappropriate way is part of the citation for why you might bring more of it in. But we want to be careful about that. We've been really, I think, thoughtful in how we've approached this issue. Probably if we didn't have the policy, it wouldn't be enacted now, but since we do, there's an attentiveness to being careful about how we might change in the future.
We'll go right down here in front, second row.
With Mercedes-Benz Stadium obviously being now your home for the SEC championship game for the next couple of years, and the national championship being held there last year, I'm curious, what have you heard about how last year went at the stadium and how it's kind of stacked up to other venues in the past?
In venues, spectacular. The halo board and the views of the city. In fact, during our championship game, I walked on kind of an elevated bridge that's on the city view side, and you look back into the stadium, and it's almost like you're hovering outside a football stadium looking at a game. And I really give credit from an architectural standpoint. The views in different places are outstanding. I don't think it's a secret that there were some issues on ingress and egress, and I know that the Falcons and the Mercedes-Benz Stadium staff have worked to overcome those issues. Things happened so rapidly last year that there was a lot of learning going on. We've had great follow-up meetings with again, the Falcons and Mercedes-Benz staff, so I'm sure we'll overcome those. What's great for us is we had the most highly attended SEC championship game since '92 was last year in the first year of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which I think is a testimony to the two teams, Georgia and Auburn, but then the fact that people want to be in there. So it's been an adjustment. It's very different than the Georgia Dome, some fan access that we've managed, but the working relationship with the Mercedes-Benz Stadium leadership and the Falcons leadership for us has been outstanding in that regard.
We'll go standing over here in the back left.
Hi, Commissioner. What is the thing that you fear the worst for our game with legalized sports gambling?
I don't know, Rachel, that I've not reduced to one issue. My message has been the integrity, and I think everybody has said this, the integrity of the games is paramount. In the past, from time to time, people will say, well, you want this, you want that. No, games play out, officials get it right, might make mistakes. Coaches make decisions that play out right or wrong. Players make decisions or make plays or don't make plays. Those are just realities of competition. It should be evaluated in that way, not with this other, hey, is there something else nefarious taking place? And that is a meaningful concern, but that's a global concern. And then I reduce it to comparisons. So let's look at professional football, where there's a roster of 53, a practice team, and you go into the practice facility and you go out and you go on about your life. It's really a contained environment. College football is very different. There are more than twice as many people involved as participants. So our rosters into the season will run up 110, 120, 125 football players in total, number one. Number two, you have a lot of assistants, student assistants around a program, because that's natural. That's never been problematic. And then either before practice or after practice, you send your participants out to go to class, to go to study groups, to go see their friends. And those are all touch points. And that informs the concern. And that's why our institution's leadership on education, the importance of information flowing back if there's some interesting questions or seeking of information. And that's what then informs this idea of an availability report or an injury report. But we need to think about the dynamics in place around college football, the differences in the NFL, and if we're going to do this on a consistent basis from a national standpoint, and understand our motivations. And so those are the concerns that keep me up at night. I do think it's important to remember we've had sports gambling. We've had it in Nevada, and we've had illegal sports gambling. And what we're seeing now is an increase of legalized sports gambling, which then provides an opportunity for transparency and understanding about what's really happening, and corrections should we identify problems, corrections quickly when they may arise.
We'll go back right over here in the cameras.
6 new coaches in the football landscape. I'm just curious your take on that. Do you feel that speaks to the competitive nature of the league, or just circumstance?
A bit of both. My view is the expectations are high, and I talked a lot about change. I did not talk about change among football coaches, because I think everybody knows that's there. I think that change is a result of high expectations. Everyone wants to ascend the mountaintop. And some of it's probably circumstantial, so some of it's some other movement that's not just competitive. We've had movement before. What's maybe if you transfer and look at some change that happened around men's basketball a few years ago, that's elevated our men's basketball in a significant way. And hopefully as those continue, those programs have brought new coaches in, make adjustments and build, we'll see, which is hard to believe, the level of competitiveness in this league even increase across all 14 football programs.
Go down in front to the left.
Yes, Commissioner Ed Daniels from New Orleans. Sir, 2 questions. Number one, is there any possibility or likelihood that this event would ever be considered for the Superdome in the future? 1. And 2, I know you've had a lot of discussions about this, but how do you stem the tide of the people who want to stay home and watch games on their widescreen TVs and not go to the stadium anymore? And is there really any solution to that you see on the horizon?
The first one, I've been open that moving our Media Days events has been on my mind for 2 years. Georgia was on my mind, to quote the song lyric, and we're here now. We're scheduled to be back in Birmingham next year, and then we don't have a destination known. I've not thought about the Superdome in particular, but perhaps a few years ago I wasn't thinking about Atlanta in particular, so one never knows. As it relates to fan attendance patterns, when I spoke this morning about our discussions around football scheduling, embedded in that is our fan and our fan interests. That's one of a number of elements. And we've had those conversations for a number of years. So 7 years ago, we appointed a task force, a working group on fan engagement. We've changed how we present games, access to video on the screen, so you can watch replays just like you have at home. You've seen in Mercedes-Benz Stadium concession pricing changes. We're learning from that. What we want is to make sure the games are accessible. That really is step one. And step two is they have to be compelling, and that in part relates to scheduling. That's why it's a piece of the scheduling conversation. We do that still better than anyone else, but we're not inattentive to the fact that fan behavior is shifting over time, and there are other options, yet we want to make sure that our stadiums are welcoming places that they're sized properly, that they have clubs and access to elements that make it the kind of place you want to spend your Saturday. And the good thing for us is it's not just a game in college football, it's that entire campus experience. And that's another element that our schools have become even better and better about activating around our games.
All right, we got time for one more down here on the left.
There's some schools and conferences that have mentioned that they do not want to send a team to a bowl with a 5-7 record. The SEC is the most competitive league in the country. What is your thoughts on 5-7 teams going to bowls?
We've had a 5-7 team accept that opportunity. So that was Mississippi State and St. Pete in 2016. And we've had a team decline that opportunity. That was Missouri, I believe, after the 2015 season. And we have adjusted our policy, so we don't say go or don't go. We have changed our policy from a revenue standpoint that if you go, you'll make that economic decision on your own. And if it works, great. If you make the decision not to, then that's a campus choice. We want to protect. So fundamentally, we want to make sure the 6-6 teams have opportunities. That remains for this conference an important part of our bowl access as you develop programs and develop young people.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.